over.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, Professor, it has been like a month or two since we've said hi to each other. I mean, we've typed a little bit, but this is the first time I've heard your voice since late February.
Well, it's good. You probably get tired of like I do. You get tired of the sound of your own voice. You probably get tired of my voice.
You're a pleasant habit. Let's say. Yeah. How is that? As hopefully a nice compliment.
As are you, and my condolences too.
You're kind. The last time we talked, it was the day after my mom had a major stroke, and we worked our way through that for a few weeks, and then she's been deceased for 3 weeks now. So thank you for that. I do have a major op-ed, one of those front page of the things, 2-pager with pictures and stuff coming out in the Denver Post in a couple weeks over it. Hopefully you'll find it interesting, and hopefully you won't be angry at me.
Never.
If you don't mind, I'd like to steer us for just a second, and then even if you want to interrupt, and maybe you can just write a note, if you disagree, or and then I'm going to open it up to conversation and see where you'd like to take it too. Here's the premise. I assume you've been good for the last 2 months since we've chatted. You're healthy, and students aren't driving you nuts.
No, great students. We have a lot of flooding here right now.
But that's not causing like permanent damage or death, or
no, not to me. My house is fine, but it's pretty devastating in some of these outlying areas.
Yeah. And we watch that on the news, of course. But you've been healthy and happy. You've had a spring break. Are you on spring break now, or?
A couple weeks. I got a couple weeks. 2 weeks still.
Okay. So you've just been plodding away, being a professor at a university or college in California.
Yep.
Cool. I stepped back from society for 2 months.
Right.
I effectively moved into my mom's home and was her not roommate, because I was in my childhood room and she was in the master bedroom right next to it. But I basically moved into the home to keep her alive for 4 weeks, and that's not the topic of this show. But it's interesting that I basically withdrew from society, work and hobbies. I did run every day, because that's what I do, is I run every day. But you go out for a mile run, and I really literally for like a month just went for 1 mile a day. Now, oddly enough, besides taking care of my mom and arranging other caretakers, you can't do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week so I had other caretakers. I had a niece fly in from Idaho and Washington, and another nephew fly in from Hawaii. They spent a week helping me take care. And then I had one of my best buddies, lifelong buddies, is a nurse, and he came and spent 2 days with her. I mean, so it was arranging other people and meals and stuff. Yeah. But I generally care a ton about news and culture and what's going on in society. And I mean, on a day after day for decades, I care about what's going on in Ukraine and what's happening in California and how our own state is comparing to other states and how's the crime and, just all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. And for almost 2 months, I totally stepped back, and this sounds crass, but I didn't care. Mm-hmm. When you're thinking about the life of your mother and death of the father of 9 years in the same house. They lived in the same house for 56 years, the house that they moved into because I was born. That's how old I am. Mm-hmm. And so I'm surrounded by 56 years of stuff and all my family's memories. And really, I didn't care about Ukraine or our Constitution or tax rates or the Supreme Court rulings. Now, here's the weird thing, Professor, is I kept up on it as much. Every night, I'm up at 1 a.m. If she's up going to the restroom, I'm up at 3. I'm up like 6 hours in the middle of the night, waiting to see if she's going to wake up and fall, that kind of stuff. It was pretty stressful. So It's not like I just like zoomed out and was a vegetable. I read as much as I've ever read, and I checked Facebook, and I checked, what I read the Dispatch. I kind of knew what was going on in society, but I didn't have any desire to be engaged or argue or advocate my own causes or things. I just didn't seem important compared to spending time with my mom and trying to do the best I could as her executor and at that time guardian, legal guardian, and medical power of attorney guardian, et cetera. But I've now, that's just the premise. My dad, as you know, collected books, and there's probably not 1,000, but there's at least 500 or 800, and at least 400 or 500 of them are hardback, and probably 200 of them are over 100 years old. And a lot of them are inscribed by my great grandfather or my great grandmother in 1904. And dearest or Wolliver, or dearest Martha, I'd like you to have this in your childhood. Well, that's my great grandmother. And there was somebody else writing to her, and it was 100 years old, and I go, okay, well, I can't sell this stuff in the estate sale. I've got to pull this apart. And then, of course, I have my own passions and interests. So I got to stop that. And this is a signature of my dad to me. I got to save this book. And so I'm going through literally probably 1,000 books right now over the last couple of weeks, and recollecting on my mom and my dad. And I came across this series, and I'm sorry for the long premise, I'm almost done. I came across this series that in almost always, if it wasn't for meeting you, I would have just put this in the recycle bin. Well, I sold it at the estate sale. And then if it didn't sell, then I'd give it away to those little libraries that we have, or maybe our own, or then if they didn't want it, then I'd put it in the recycle bin. But it's called the Great Ideas Program. And I don't know if this is, I've never heard of the Great Ideas Program. It's what?
It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
You've heard of it?
Well, there have been several great books and great ideas programs over the years. And I want to say that the University of Chicago was pretty prominent in this movement in the mid 20th century, but they had a great, and then there are, I'm probably butchering this, and I'm sure somebody who knows more about it, but there's the great books and the great ideas programs, and they're all fantastic. I'm always very impressed with what they managed to put together.
Yeah, and so it's because of you I even paused to look at this. And this book isn't inscribed, it's not noted. It looks to me, by the way I've opened it, that my dad never opened it. It's just been sitting on the shelf for 50 years, because this one was printed in 1959. Yeah. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to read a page and a half. And sorry, that's a long time, but it seems like this resonates with the things we've been doing over the last couple of years. And then I've got a series of other books. I want you to tell me whether just to read them or not. And that's the conversation today is, gotcha. John, you shall read these. And by the way, these are only one little box randomly I picked out of about 14 boxes I'm going to save. And I'm only halfway through now. And it's just one random box and this series. So do you mind if I just read this to you? And
love it. I love all of it. This is great. Okay. We should have invited Tom Bursino in for this.
Oh, would he invite this kind of thing?
Or my buddy Robert Davis.
Well, maybe we can talk about it again.
Yeah,
maybe we can talk about it again.
Yep.
The number 2 book, by the way, I guess I should tell you this just real quick. The number 2 book is The Development of Political Theory and Government. The number 3 book is Foundations of Science and Mathematics. Number 4 is Religion and Theology. Number 5 is Philosophy of Law and Jurisprudence. Number 6 is Imaginative Literature. Number 7 is Imaginative Literature 2. Wow, Imaginative Literature gets 2 books. Wow, that's kind of interesting. 8 is Ethics and the Study of Moral Values. 9 is Biology, Psychology, and Medicine. And the last one is on philosophy. Professor, I'm sorry there isn't one on history itself. I assume it's interwoven through all of them. Yeah. So here's the preface to the first book, and I'd like your reaction to it, and then we'll go through some of my books. This is the very second sentence. What is a liberal education? It is easy to say what it is not. It is not specialized education, not vocational, avocational, professional, or pre-professional. It is not an education that teaches a man how to do any specific thing. I am tempted to say that it is the education that no American gets in an educational institute nowadays. Remember, it's 1959. I'd be interested to see what he thinks 63 years later. We are all specialists now. Even early in high school, we were told that we must begin to think how we were going to earn a living, and the prerequisites that are supposed to prepare us for that activity become more and more the ingredients of our educational diet. I'm afraid we shall have to admit that the educational process in America is either a rather pleasant way of passing the time until we go to work, or a way of getting ready for some occupation, or a combination of the two. What is missing is education to human beings, education to make the most of our human powers, education for our responsibilities as members of a democratic society, education for freedom. This is what liberal education is. It is the education that prepares us to be free men. You have to have this education if you're going to be happy. For happiness consists in making the most of yourself. You have to have this education if you're going to be a member of the community. For membership in the community implies the ability to communicate with others. You have to have this education if you're going to be an effective citizen of a democracy. For citizenship requires that you understand the world in which you live, and that you do not leave your duties to be performed by others, living vicariously and vacuously by their virtue and intelligence. A free society is composed of free men. To be free, you have to be educated for freedom. This means you have to think, for the free man is one who thinks for himself. It means that you have to think, for example, about the aims of life and of organized society. These are the questions raised by this first reading. I read this out of a pure accident and situation of my mom and went, wow, this reminds me of Professor Tootle and his conversations over the last 2 years. No matter what the topic is, war or abortion or gays or capital punishment or taxes and all the various things we've talked about, some of which we agree on, some of which we disagree. Many would disagree with us and we disagree with many others. But it's not the point of our series. It's not why we're doing this, is it? Isn't it more like in the introduction of this little series of books?
Yes, I would say I agree with every sentence in that introduction.
You could have written it. In fact, you probably have written versions of it in your Facebook posts and other speeches you've given.
Well, in many ways, I guess I'm the sort of an heir to that tradition, that if he was concerned about it going away in 1959, he would be horrified to see what has happened in the last 60 years.
Right. So, Professor, what, and I'm not surprised you like it because it sounds just like you. I truly, when I was reading this, I was going, Professor Tootle could have written this intro. How have we started to go astray? And I have a couple hangers on. It seems like now news isn't news, it's precursor to news. The Supreme Court might rule, and then we argue about that for 9 months before they've even ruled, and then they rule 9 months. But it's not, the news is only like one day and then some other people's thoughts on it, but we argue about a case before it's decided for 9 months, and usually it's not people that are even educated in Supreme Court decisions. It's just me, and people like me, and we all argue about it. But then we get kind of drawn into some snarky stuff, and we kind of get points if we come up with some neat tweet that is funny, or put it on a meme that really jabs somebody good, and then that may be news. Look, everybody's looking at this neat tweet embarrassing somebody because they said something stupid, or they're a hypocrite. And we just are. It seems like we could take any issue, and it seems like we've just kind of argue around the water table about not totally silly stuff, but just kind of not valuable things. Doesn't seem to be adding to our culture or our society or our wealth or our happiness. And I'm not a grumpy guy. I'm pretty optimistic. And I'm not a generational guy. Damn kids, get off my lawn either. I'm not sure it is worse with the younger kids. You're a teacher. You may give us some insights. I kind of impressed with a bunch of the young folks I know. So I don't think it's that. But what's happening in America, I assume it's happening around the world, but why are we getting distracted off important things like the titles of all these books I've read in a liberal education sense? Are we lazy? Are we bored? Have we gotten so wealthy? And I know there's a lot of poor people, but I mean, as a society, have we gotten wealthy enough that we just have to argue about crazy stuff? I'm going to shut up for a few minutes and just let you give a historical perspective to the best of your opinion with limited preparation. None.
I mean, I guess my first reaction is, so is your question, why do we still not value a liberal education?
Yeah.
Because it's hard. And I guess I could answer it from an individual standpoint. The reason why is because it's difficult and it takes time. And if you're a parent, I send my kids off to school, and I assume that the school is teaching them things that they need to know. And then I'm often horrified to find out that what I considered the basics is just not what is taught anymore. And there's a lot of self-doubt that comes in with parenting, where you say, well, maybe I'm just old and out of touch, and the stuff that I think they need to know is wrong, and that if this is what grades are going to be based on, and my kids are getting good grades, then I guess this is just what education is now. From the standpoint of institutions, there's an awful lot of pressure on people to not get fired. That's probably the greatest, and no one wants to be revealed as inadequate. In a way, one of the things, because we're all scared of getting fired or losing our jobs, there's a real incentive to never admit your own ignorance. And part of engaging in a liberal education is, step one is admitting that you don't know anything, and that eventually, no matter what you study, you get to the part where you get to the unknown and the speculative. And we try to pretend like there's some firm divide between the sciences and the humanities in this regard, but it's simply not true. The only things that a man can know are man-made abstractions. Anything that comes into contact with reality or the natural world, you eventually bump up against uncertainty, and that hurts one's ego. You sort of have to admit, well, you get to a certain point, you just have to say, well, I don't know, and you have to be comfortable around a lot of people who say, I don't know. I think that it's also a mindset too, that Calvin Coolidge in one of my favorite addresses, this Business and the Free Press, was this great address he gave, and he talked about of education we can't have too much, but of propaganda we can't have too little. And in the middle of this speech, written in 1924, 25, he says, no doubt that we are encountering problems more complex than have ever been encountered, but he says, not all experts are without guile. And
what's guile mean? Sorry, I don't know that word well.
Oh, just not all experts are disinterested. Every expert has a reason to spin what their own field is. Not everybody can set aside their own self-interest when giving you the benefit of their expertise. And I think a liberal education is also one of those things that, as society becomes more complex, people begin believing that what they must do is learning the skill set to specialize, because what this is going to do, I can't tell you how many people, if you talk to a young person, that you follow someone who's a senior in high school or a junior in high school into a room full of adults, and I can script out how the conversation is going to go. They're all going to say, oh, you're getting ready to graduate, what are you going to do next year, right? And the next question will often be, what's your major? What college are you going to go to? And then what's your major? And then if you have an answer for that, if you're a college student, you say what your major is. The next question people ask is attaching it to a job. They'll say, what are you going to do with that? If you answer anything having to do with the humanities, they say, oh, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to teach?
Teach? Yeah,
there's a natural, and it comes from a place of love, because as adults we know that you have to make a living, and the overall assumption people have is that college is job training, and that even when ranking schools, we'll often do things where we'll say, and I do this, all the time, but I do it more to push back against the idea that college is job training, because one of the things I like to point out is that if you go to an elite college, somebody with a degree in philosophy 5 years after graduation, and then you look at them 10 years after graduation, they're going to make more than somebody who does computer programming. And yet the person who does computer programming is told, oh, you are doing something that is good, right? Because we can see the clear path to an income that's going to come. And often their starting salary will be higher. But if you look 5 and 10 years later, someone with a good, solid education often has a higher income and higher job satisfaction. But tell that to the parents who are worried about their kids paying back their student loans. I often think that these kinds of conversations are dominated by elite institutions when most people don't go to elite institutions. I think that most of the conversations about higher education and education in general need to be about public schools and public colleges, because that's where most people go. And in that kind of real world, there's a constant devaluing of a liberal education. And part of it was something that happened from a structural standpoint because of the liberal education was so firmly associated with teaching. So here's what has happened over the years. The liberal education, you would learn all of the stuff that's in that book series. And if you graduated from college, there was an assumption that you knew all that stuff. That if somebody brought up Marx or Hegel, you would be able to say, oh yeah, Marx said this, or Hegel said this, or Aristotle said this, or Plato said this. And there would be an assumption that if you were you talk to an older person today and you say, well, you're a college graduate, you would just assume that they had read Moby Dick and that they had a passing knowledge of the Bible, even if they weren't religious, that they had been exposed to a little bit of poetry, that, in other words, that they could tell you about supply and demand. I don't know. But what has happened over the years is, in order to meet first the demands of school districts and public colleges, the liberal arts degree kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then the push from the 1960s, precisely the time after that book series came out, one of the things that students demanded was more choice. So that the worst of all things could have happened to the author of that intro, which is that right after he got done writing it, within 10 years, students were offered a choice of what to study, and they chose not to study that stuff. And in a way, there's this horrible, from my perspective, distortion that took place in the 60s and the 70s, where colleges had previously been character shaping institutions. You go to college in order to learn from your professors what is important. In the 60s and 70s, I should say late 60s and 70s is when this really happened. Early 60s, it started around 65, 66. And by 68, it was game on. But what really happened was that colleges began responding to student demand, shaping the character of students. And what everybody wants, according to Dire Straits, is money for nothing and your chicks for free. It led to this trend that I would not now call credentialism, which is to say, I don't want to have to learn this stuff. I just want the credential.
The check mark.
I don't want to have to actually learn anything. I just associate the receiving of this credential with being responding to student desires as if students were consumers. And one of my old professors pointed this out in a very neat little phrase, but because there was a constant pressure in every era since the 1970s to be more responsive to the desires of students. And he would say, if you would like the prestige of a university degree, you must get a university education. And I wrote a note, just a little note to one of my VPs last week, where I said, education is very strange, where we're the only, we seem to be completely disconnected from reality. Because we say we're going to make something worthless, and then we are confused when society no longer values it. Like, we're the ones who made it worthless. And then we say to society, hey, we're handing out these worthless degrees. And society goes, oh, well, these degrees are worthless. Got it. Message received. So one of the other things that happened is, because people need teachers at different times, and the fastest route to become a teacher was through a liberal arts, liberal studies degree, that the degree just kept getting smaller and smaller with fewer requirements and more options, and all of those things that would have been contained in a liberal arts, liberal studies education in the 1950s are really just wiped away. And to the extent that just this past week in California, one of the things that's being debated is eliminating the American institutions requirement. And at a certain point, if the only thing you need to know in order to graduate from college is that America is bad, and you can get a college degree by just repeating that over and over again, society.
And you're not even being facetious. You're being sincere on this. You're truly concerned.
Yeah. No, we in California, we now have an ethics studies, requirement, and it's putting pressure on, trying to get students out of their first 2 years. And so they're saying, well, we're going to shift it to being an upper division requirement. And then when you look at what the Cal States and the UCs are doing for American institutions, they're simply redefining American institutions to be just anything. So yesterday I had a colleague say, well, you're overstating the case. I said, no, well, test it out. Go on the website for UCLA, listeners can do this if they want, and look at what fulfills the American institutions requirement at UCLA. And then ask yourself, does this have anything to do with the intent of what any normal person would think an American institutions requirement would have? I mean, you're a pretty normal person. Ask, and if I were to ask you what you think American institutions would require, I bet that you would come pretty darn close to nailing what is in the original law. I bet you could almost write that original law without ever looking at it. I mean, let's ask you right now, like, I don't know, we'll make listeners who want to do this test, right? John Brackney, what would you assume is the purpose of an American institutions requirement for college students? What would you think they'd learn?
First, I need to be naive with you to understand the question. American institutions is systems of government or organizations. That's what that buzzword I don't use.
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. You would assume, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, that like if we have this requirement, say that you have to learn American institutions, you would have to prove or take classes and, receive an education that would give you an overall understanding of how the civic functions of America have worked. You would assume that a college graduate would have taken an American history class or two.
Something about how we were founded and what happened in the last couple hundred years, and why, and wait, what is the role of states versus federal government, and is it all inclusive, or is it really run by the private sector, economics, et cetera, et cetera.
And I would just say, you would assume that a college graduate would know something about that we have a Declaration of Independence, that we have a Constitution, about basically how government works. And that's what the original law says. And then what the state of California is doing is just removing that by defining it out of existence.
So Professor, let me interrupt you and remember, tick mark a couple things in your head where you were planning on going, because this may just be a short interruption. We have a fairly vigorous two parties. They're weird and they have flipped in many ways. It just doesn't make sense. Labels don't make any sense anymore. But there are two parties that viciously attack each other and occasionally flip the presidency, etc. And there's lots of conversation about education right now, but it doesn't seem to be as authentic and as deep as we're having right now. It seems to be red meat for your side or something to make the other side look bad on both sides. They just kind of like throw out something weird to get everybody to emotionally glom onto something. And it seems to me to be a distraction from a deeper conversation that we're having right now. So there are two sides that disagree with this, but it's phrased in such weird ways, like wokeness and CRT, and everybody argues about that, but not really what we're talking about. Am I wrong, or do you agree with that as well?
I agree with it. And I would just not only agree with it, re-emphasize it by saying that people seem to think that if one side is saying you must proclaim that you hate America in order to advance in society, that the antidote to that is to say you must proclaim that you love America in order to advance in society. Instead of, I would say, like Calvin Coolidge, have faith in our institutions, and instead say our institutions can actually withstand scrutiny. And instead, if I teach you about what happened in self-government, that that will be good enough, that the truth will be enough, because but that's not really where the conversation is. It's either it's compelled speech one way or compelled speech the other way, instead of, as Coolidge said, cultivating the habits of the open mind.
Yeah, so there are exceptions. And even the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, those are probably exceptions. And you may take a little bit of umbrage with the New York Times, but the bottom line is there still are good journalists and there's still good things happening in that paper. And if you have a different philosophy, the Wall Street Journal, and one of our favorites, the Dispatch, and that whole cohort of free thinkers. But they're, maybe on the liberal side, what is that big think tank in Washington? Brookings, and on the conservative side, AEI. There are remnants of good people doing good things, but it sure seems like the rest of society has just bypassed all of that. And I don't know how we unwind some of that now that we can all be citizen journalists or all have a megaphone. Seems like we have to wean out so much to even find the kernels of who the good thought leaders are, or the good institutions doing good work, or I don't know. And it sounds like I'm down. I'm actually not down. I just don't quite get how we got to this and how we start to unwind it. Thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, as to how we got to this was, we essentially had one generation of people who were much bigger than every other generation, and it caused this distortion in the American history. and hopefully we are able to recover from it. I guess on the plus side, people would like to point out that, for instance, the success of the Federalist Society in remaking the federal judiciary. But with all the success of the Federalist Society in remaking the federal judiciary, which is wonderful, and I think it's a great thing, but let's never lose sight of the fact that at every law school in America, there are no conservatives. The institutions, and these are both state and public institutions, are just completely dominated to the point where, I was listening to Advisory Opinions and this morning, and both David French and Sarah Isgur were pointing out that they both went to elite law schools, and they said, there are two conservatives, and they at what is considered the most conservative friendly law school among elite law schools. And if you go just one tier down or two tiers down, it's often zero. And the complete takeover of the humanities by people who are hostile to the big ideas, the old liberal education, is part of the reason why it has become devalued. My own discipline, history has virtually disappeared. The history major is gone. There's no history jobs available. I belong to in some ways, it's thriving in terms of demand. Good historians are still writing good history books, but it is dying in higher education.
So, Professor, let me probe a little bit in an unsophisticated way. I have told you repeatedly over the last couple of years how I'm constantly surprised by some piece of information you tell me about America, and I go, I don't remember that. And maybe I was a poor student. I get it. Maybe I wasn't paying attention that week. I get it. But I was fairly satisfied with my public school education in South Metro Denver, and it's enabled me to live a fairly satisfactory life. And our children went to the same schools I went to, elementary, junior, now middle, and high school. And I was fairly satisfied what they got. And I am constantly surprised, though, that I'm learning stuff as a 56-year-old because of friends that are outside my immediate circles who take a different worldview of things. And I mean racial issues, not having as much loyalty to the Star-Spangled Banner as I do, because of a phrase in there, third paragraph about slaves, and that shocked me. Why would you not love the Star-Spangled Banner? And so they want, my friend would like to have more emphasis on a different song than the Star-Spangled, our national anthem, one that I'd never heard of until a few years ago. It's referred to as the Black National Anthem. And so I can actually now appreciate that, wow, my worldview is different. Mine goes back to, in a superficial way, Greek and Roman history and explorers, and 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I get it. And they just are repulsed by that. Italian explorers, they truly are repulsed, and these are people I like. And so I am open to listening to their thoughts, and I'm open to a new course on a different way to look at Western civilization. How do we merge what you're saying is, oh God, John, you're listening to the wrong folks. That's just simply wrong. Sure, good people do bad things and bad people do good things. That's called being human. But to throw it all out and say there's no value in the founding of our country because of something that we've talked about a lot, slavery, etc. And then to me, it seems like we're doing the same thing as not you, but it seems like our society is going, you either have to have all ethnic studies, as I think you said, or no. It seems like there's some happy medium in understanding the good and bad of everything. I don't quite get why we're what everyone's pissed at each other. I don't understand why everybody's so angry. Why can't we just go, that's an interesting point. Let's read up on that a little bit more. Can you help me think through this? And then I've got some books I want to run by you.
Yeah, I would just say the problem is so severe that we're so far away from having reasonable discussions about arguable points. The problem with the problems with American education are so much deeper that when I talk to a newly hired English teacher at a high school who informs me that nobody at their high school assigns books, that what they do is they listen to books on YouTube with their heads down, and nobody writes papers. I just, how can you engage in a thoughtful discussion with somebody who doesn't know how to read or write? It's not, or who's never read a book. Like there is no context. So if you have no context for anything that you're learning, it just becomes fodder for your own reactionary prejudices. So that's kind of the seeds of our reactionary politics come from the lack of a liberal education, a common liberal education. Because if you don't know anything, everything is just ammunition. You learn something, you think, well, here's a fact, and a fact taken out of context is a lie. And again, I point people back to that Calvin Coolidge, a perverted and distorted view of the facts is the most effective way to lie, is to just take the truth out of context. Because then if you don't know anything, if you look it up, and this is the problem even with so much fact checking that takes place now, is that if you look it up, you will say, this independent fact is correct, and this independent fact is correct, except for what you've done is you've lined up 4 correct facts in such a way that it creates a lie. And that, you are an ingenious liar, but you're not adding to the discourse of the nation if what you're doing is perverting and distorting the relationship between facts in order to be an advocate for a political position instead of, to use the phrase again, cultivating the habits of an open mind.
So you go right back to the premise of this introduction to the great books to the liberal education, that you go right back to it. In order to be free, we have to be educated and thoughtful. We have to be able to stand up and make our own decision and not just go, some wag of whatever sort says something and I'm going to use it as ammunition, as you said.
But I'd also say, look at also what he said about being happy. I don't know. It's a funny thing. I'll go a while without, really diving into a book. And I say a while, maybe a week. Right. Then I find myself in my office hours, and if no students come in, I'll just pull a book off the shelf and I'll start reading. And immediately I'm happier, because I am, and even I'm working on something right now. I'm writing something and it's hard, but I'm happier because I feel like I'm producing something of value. And we wish that there was some other way to make ourselves happy, but there is no other way to make yourself happy. Work is, it feels like I'm quoting Coolidge a lot here, but another thing Coolidge says in another area is work is not a curse. It is part of what makes you a happy person. And if you're engaged in advocacy on the basis of a lie, there's some part of your psyche that knows that what you're doing is poisonous to yourself and to others. And it's not ever going to make you happy. because I always put it, I sometimes put, this hasn't come up in class for a while, but it seems like this used to come up a lot about like 10 years ago. But I would say, do you want your political beliefs to be based on lies? I mean, make the case for why you want your belief system to be based on lies.
Well, I think the short-term answer, Professor, is all the consultant class in politics for the last through much of my life has said you have to win to govern. You can't make the decisions unless you win. And both sides have kind of made the determination that they got to win or you ain't governing.
Right. No, I get that. And I also get lawyers, right? I understand that we need a society of advocates, people who, I mean, if you think about what a lawyer does when they are being an advocate, you are perverting and distorting the relationship of these facts in a way that is...
or I would say making the best case possible under the facts, but yes, I'm not sure.
You're trying to make the best case under the facts. Yeah. I mean, am I wrong? So you're not doing something that's wrong, but that's the way to become a good lawyer. That's the way to become a good political consultant. It's not the answer for how every human being in your society should live your life. And it's not even the way that lawyers should approach anything in their lives other than lawyering.
Right. I think that's a good distinction. Well, Professor, we've got a lot to still talk about, but only 13 minutes max to go. And I really want to run through a couple books because over the next, 6 months, I hope to read the ones you tell me I should read. How's that for an assignment?
Yeah. Wow.
And remember, I have another 30 books, so you could say no to all these, and then I'll send you a message. Well, how about these ones?
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah. If you could just give me like the author's last name too.
Yeah. Miracle at Philadelphia: The Story of the Constitutional Convention, May to September 1787, by Catherine Drinker Bowen. Never heard of her.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a yay or nay.
Can we have like a maybe stack?
All right, I'll put that in the middle. I'm going to put the ones you read on the right. Here's a controversial one that I've thought about all my life, and I don't know why my dad had it. And it's paperback, so I'd normally throw it away, but since it's already free and in my hands, Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler.
That's another one on the maybe stack.
All right. We can go back if we have time. I only have 8 more. This is one. Fighting Prophet, Sherman by Lloyd Lewis.
Don't know it.
It's talking about the, Sherman and the General Sherman and what he did in the Civil War.
Yeah, I used to know the book, so I don't know whether to recommend
it.
So
right, left, or undecided?
I would just say probably no. That's a good one to ask Tom. About.
Cool. This Hallowed Ground by Bruce Catton.
Yes, that's a yes. You want to read
Mainstream. That one. It's called Mainstream of America.
Yep, you want that.
The story of the Union side of the Civil War.
Yes, that's a yes.
Cool. Never heard of it before.
Yeah, it's a good book.
The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government by Jefferson Davis.
I'd kind of put that in the Mein Kampf. Like if you have time, it's nice to read them in their own words. But if you're not a professional historian, like why would you bother? I don't know.
Well, because I'm trying to figure out how come the Civil War hasn't been over, or we're still fighting it apparently in so many ways, in a weird, diffuse, angled way, a flanking maneuver way. But it seems like we're still fighting the Civil War. So I'm trying to get inside other people's heads to understand why they feel so strong.
Essentially, you read Jefferson Davis for the same reason you read Hitler, which is that when you read it, you will be shocked at what they admit to because they don't think that what they're doing is wrong. And so there's a value in that. But I just, if there's another book, like I'd rather have you read like Bruce Catton and take that book seriously and read it slow. I'd rather have you read Catton slowly.
Yeah, than a bunch of books and not know what they mean.
And then if you have time, do those others. Yeah.
Cool. The Anti-Federalists, Writings of the Opponents of the Constitution, edited by Herbert Storing.
That's good. It's a little hard to read.
As we've been talking about. Well, I've been waiting until I'm 56 years old to do it.
Yeah.
Yay or nay?
I would say I dip into that one.
All right, that's a middle then. Okay, I only
that's
got
a
four
middle.
more.
Yeah, sorry, I can't be more definitive.
The Beginning of the Republic, 1775 to 1825 by Clarence Carson. Paperback, but it just seems like I should know a brief history of the United States. I should know, you know how much I've enjoyed some of the books you've recommended, so I figured I'd keep reading on the founding of our country.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I really like James Oakes and Gordon Wood, and I haven't
read Gordon Wood, so I'll try to remember
Gordon
that.
Wood has a great little book on the American Revolution. I mean, it's really short. It's like a short introduction, and I recommend that to a lot of people.
All right, excellent. I got to go back to something I read 35 or 40 years ago in college, Machiavelli, The Prince.
Yeah, that's worth reading if you haven't read it.
It's worth reading twice in your life, I think, and it's time again.
Especially as an adult, you know, you find that you've changed, and yeah.
Excellent. This is one I would normally throw away. Well, not throw away, but The War of the Revolution by Christopher Ward. At least 100 years old by Macmillan. History, I don't know. Have you ever heard of this one? A 2-book series?
No, but you know, I'm intrigued by that. I think that might be good. That's one of those, you know, that might be really good.
Last two. This is one that I wouldn't have thought about doing it, but you've mentioned several times in our last conversations that we need better curators, or we need to see what we need better editors is another version you've said. So I'd normally want to read the original book rather than a compilation, but this is an invitation to learning, the significance of great books and their authors, a clear, concise, and inspiring discussion of 27 of the greatest books of all times, why they have endured and why for generations to come, and they influence mankind. And yes, it's Aristotle and the Holy Bible and Rousseau and Defoe and Tolstoy and you know, and so I kind of thought it would be interesting to see why they thought each book was important instead of just putting my own mind to it. I thought it would be nice to have a teacher in the form of a book.
Yeah, that might be interesting. I'd sort of put that in that 5th or 6th place, you know.
Okay.
So right now I'd say you put Catton at the top, and then Machiavelli below that, and then maybe that American Revolution, and then that one right underneath it.
Got it. And as a transition, and remember, this was just one out of 10 sets of books that I'm going through. Out of a transition, I want to thank you. A little tiny book, The Treasure of Friendship, favorite writings about enjoying and keeping friends.
Oh, that's nice.
It's just nice. And so, Professor, thank you for your friendship. I want to, you know, it's just big words and small, well, you know, it's little poems almost about friendships and the importance of it. And it seems like we're just losing all sorts of interest. And I don't mean in a generational way, but I remember reading a study that said the average American has 1.2 friends or something.
Right. It's shocking.
Well, how do we have a society that works if you don't actually have any friends? So I figured maybe I'd get some insights on what other people are thinking in a little novella, well, not novella, a little treatise like this. I know you would give me about 100 other books to read, and in time we'll do that. But give me a summary of today's conversation from your perspective.
I don't know. I think.
What do you want me to take from this? If anyone listens to this conversation, you've mentioned a bunch of things, but if there was like 1 or 2 bullets or 3 that we should work on as good citizens, together with our friends.
If I wanted somebody to take something away, it's that there's absolutely no substitute for setting aside quiet time and reading slowly and writing slowly, without distraction. And no matter how much you want for there to be a shortcut, there is no shortcut. You just have to turn off your phone, sit under a light, and read slowly. And one of the first things that's going to happen to you is you're probably going to fall asleep, because everybody or sleep in America too. But and the first time you turn off your electronic devices, you're just going to be like knocked out, because we're so used to being overstimulated all the time. But take a book to it. You know, my other really great friend who we got to have on this show is Tony Williams from the Bill of Rights Institute. and he's another guy who just loves books and loves learning and just never stops reading and reads everything. And we've often talked about just like one of the great pleasures in life is to go to a coffee shop with a book and read, for 45 minutes. And I know that people will say, I don't have time for that. And my usual response is, if you tell me you don't have time for that, I want to see your phone. I want to see your phone usage for the past week. And if I can't find 60 minutes in that in that phone usage, then I will apologize. And but if you pull out your phone and look at your phone usage from the last week, I bet we can find 60 minutes in there. And another, I don't know if you know this, but when I do this, I always grab a stack of books, and it's always a stack of books that I haven't started reading yet. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you would even find this interesting, but like, here's the stack of books.
I think it's always great. Go through it quickly.
I just got a big order from Kansas Press. So I got G-Man on J. Edgar Hoover, Winning Independence by John Ferling, Supreme Court Expansion of Presidential Power, a book on the slaughterhouse cases.
What are the slaughterhouse cases?
It's the beginning of the regulatory state. Very famous set of cases that gave the federal government the right to regulate the private economy. A book on the origins of special warfare, and then a book on John Marshall called Without Precedent. And so these are the books I have not read. They have they're sitting, but I'll tell you the one that I'm most excited about. Well, actually, here are those came last week, but here are the books that I'm actually excited about reading. A book on creativity by Rick Rubin, who's a music producer.
Nice.
The American Spirit by David McCullough, because it contained the commencement address from when I graduated, and I didn't realize that. And so I picked up his book, The Pioneers, too, which was inspired by when he came and gave my commencement address. Here is a book that was really intriguing because it's pretty critical of America, written by Kermit Roosevelt III, who I've read a couple of his novels. He's a law professor, and his grandfather was Theodore Roosevelt. This is the book I'm reviewing. I don't know if I should reveal this, maybe not, but a very interesting book called The Myth of Left and Right.
Nice. Are you allowed to say who you're reviewing it for?
Well,
not yet.
Until it's published, maybe I should.
Yeah, not yet.
But the book I'm recommending to everyone right now is Psych by Paul Bloom. I don't care who you are. I've never met a human being who doesn't need to read this book. This is a fantastic book about just the kind of guy sitting back. He's a Yale psych professor, and he just kind of wrote a book about where the state of psychology is today. And what else have I got here? Ghost at the Feast, Robert Kagan. And then I haven't finished it yet, so I probably need to, but everyone should probably read the Stephen Knott, Coming to Terms with John Kennedy. So that's just the stuff that's like next to my couch.
And you're recommending that every American, old, young, male, female, black, white, every spectrum of every category, if you're a citizen, you need to slow down. If they listen to one thing today from this whole show, this whole conversation, it's take an hour a week and read a good quality book without distraction.
Yeah. And one of the things, I always say, like, I don't have time for bad books. I can't even keep up on the good ones. So a lot of times people will recommend a bad book and I'll just think, I'll tell you what, I'll read the bad ones when I'm finished with all the good ones. And as for that Paul Bloom book, Psych, I just, anybody who has a brain should probably think about how it works. It is a fascinating book, just start to finish. It's well, I haven't finished it yet, but there so far there hasn't been a part of it that I that wasn't pretty mind-blowing.
Fascinating. I'm glad, that's a surprise to me. So thank you for a history professor arguing for a psychology book.
Well, that book on creativity by Rick Rubin, that has nothing to do with history. That's
well, I know, but you're also a
musician.
musician. That's
Yeah.
an unfair. I didn't point that out because you're a history professor and a musician. So
Yeah.
that didn't surprise me.
Yeah, but you're right. It's mostly history.
All right, Professor, I very much appreciate seeing you again and your reflections. Thanks for humoring me on withdrawing from society for a month or two for a personal situation. Well, and then kind of reflecting on how I should re-engage again. And then I've given you kind of my path, and thanks for your recommendations.
Yeah, and I just want to again say there are so many things in life that are more important than there's absolutely nothing wrong with prioritizing your real life and cherishing the moments where you need to pay attention. And I remember some of the best advice I got from my dad when I was very close with my grandfather, and when my grandfather died, he sort of said something along the lines of, you and your grandpa knew how you felt about each other. Yeah. And whatever you do right now is the right thing to do. And that's good advice.
That's really good advice.
You know, when you love somebody who's passing away, you love them, and whatever you do, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's yours is deeper than mine, but I'll reveal, I guess is an okay word. I'm talking to my mom just probably a week or 10 days before her death. And I go, Mom, aren't you going to miss conversations with me? And she goes, yeah, you're 56 years old and we've been talking for decades. I think we're going to be okay. and in a way, in a perverse way, it could be sad. Like I don't have anything more to tell, but her body was failing her, and she knew, she knew, and it was okay.
Yeah.
And to me, it was kind of lovely because we both kind of just laughed at each other, yeah, I've told you everything I need to tell you. And it has occurred to me. I go, well, I'll just ask Mom. The pretty standard thing. And I go, oh, well, I guess I can't ask Mom anymore. It's good advice. Your grandfather.
Yes, it is. So I also cherish my friendship with you, and I get these memories that pop up on Facebook of our past conversations, and it's so wonderful to dip back into those sometimes and listen to the foolish things I've said. And I think about what a wonderful, actually, I was thinking about this when your mom's health was failing. We're both gonna die someday.
Yep.
And one of the things that is nice is like my kids will be able to listen to me in all my flaws and heresies, and and just say that's who he was.
That's my dad.
Yep.
And that's a nice gift, isn't it? We're giving to each other.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had this conversation before, but how I explained it to my kids when Uncle Alan died, who was 101, but we have this amount of love that was put into us by others, and we carry it with us, and our job is to put it into the people around us, and that's their legacy. It's our job to take all of that goodness and hard work and love that other people put into us and do our best to put it into others. And that's it.
What a delightful way to end our conversation today. Another brilliant piece of advice, and only people can change themselves if they want to be changed. But perhaps we're planting some seeds, not only for each other, but for whoever happens upon our conversation. So, Professor, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. And hope to see you next week, right?
Yep, I think I can do it next week. 2 weeks ago or from now, I'm out. We're doing an estate sale, but next Friday, I can go if you can.
Excellent. Sounds good.
Thanks, Professor. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.